nationalism. And again, it's embedded in the concept of a nation state. But if you took the United States away, the Taiwanese, and I'm disagreeing with you a bit here, the majority of Taiwanese, the overwhelming majority of Taiwanese do not want to be part of China. Let me ask you a question. Do you think if the United States was not in Asia at all, that there would still be a conflict over the border between China and India?
Let me qualify. No, the qualification is important because if not for the United States, the conflicts would have been treated as border conflicts. And as you know, that China has already resolved peacefully about 10 border conflicts out of 14.
It's irrelevant.
Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. If you are new to the show, please smash that subscribe button. Also consider becoming a YouTube member, a Patreon, or donate small amounts in the link given in the description box. We rely on you. But the least you can do is to watch this show, like, share, and comment. Without further ado, let me welcome our guest today, Professor John Mearsheimer. Professor Mearsheimer is a realist theorist, which means he thinks the international system is dominated by great powers, and in their quest for security competition, sometimes we get war. Apart from theories, he has participated in policy debates. He was outspoken against the US invasion of Iraq in 2003, the US support of Israel, and the NATO provocation against Russia. Professor Mearsheimer, welcome to India and Global Left. What an honor to have you here.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's get started with China, because apparently what we are seeing with the tariff wars, the center of gravity of politics seems to have shifted to US-China relation. What are your thoughts about where this is heading towards?
Well, in the early 1990s, when China was still a developing country and was not a great power, the United States pursued a policy of engagement. And that policy was designed to make China a wealthy country and to integrate it into the international economy, to integrate it into international institutions. And the assumption was it would become a liberal democracy and we would all live happily ever after. I argued, and this was one of the central arguments in my book, The Tragedy of Great Power Politics, which was published in 2001, that China could not rise peacefully, and that in fact, by turning China into a wealthy country, the United States was in effect turning China into a great power. And the more powerful China became, the more difficult it would be for the United States to deal with China. I believe that is what has happened. I believe in roughly 2017, China became a great power. And it's no accident that in 2017, after Trump moved into the White House the first time, that he abandoned engagement and adopted a policy of containment. Now, up until Trump's second term, that policy of containment against China involved, number one, putting together a military alliance structure in East Asia that could contain China, and number two, defeating China in the competition over developing high-end technologies. Those were the two dimensions of the competition between the United States and China up until the second Trump administration. And now Trump has added an important third dimension, which is the trade war. And it looks like this is effectively going to end almost all trade between the United States and China. And all of this tells you that the United States and China are engaged in an intense security competition where there is a serious possibility, And I want to underline that word possibility. I'm not saying this is axiomatically going to happen. There's a serious possibility of a great power war between China and the United States. So I would just say about the recent imposition of tariffs on China and China's imposition of tariffs on the United States in retaliation, that this is not terribly surprising, because as China got more and more powerful, it was, in my opinion, inevitable that the United States and China would be rivals.
I guess I want to take a step back here to ask you about your policy recommendation towards engaging in China, because quite often there is one aspect of your writings that is just talking about the reality. But then there are also aspects where you advocate policies. We have seen it in Iraq, Israel, Russia, and so on. So do you personally believe that the United States should contain China? And if yes, then what should be those means and forms of containing China?
There's no question in my mind that the United States should contain China. My theory of international politics tells me that as China grows more powerful, the smart thing for China to do, is to dominate Asia, East Asia, the way the United States dominates the Western Hemisphere. And the reason you want to do that, if you're China, is that's the best way to enhance your security. The more powerful you are in your own region, and of course, if you become a regional hegemon, you've reached the pinnacle of power in your region, then you maximize your security. The United States is a regional hegemon in the Western Hemisphere. And if China is smart, it will try to become a regional hegemon in East Asia. However, this is not in America's national interest. The United States has a vested interest in making sure that China is not a regional hegemon. So the end result is that you will have a clash between China pursuing regional hegemony and the United States trying to prevent that. And the way for the United States to prevent it is to contain China. And I think it's essential to build an alliance structure in East Asia that can contain China. And furthermore, I do believe that the competition between the United States and China over cutting-edge technologies like AI, quantum computing, microchips, and so forth and so on, is a competition that the United States wants to win, and at least wants to make sure that China doesn't win. So I'm in favor of those two dimensions of the competition. I think they're inevitable. But I think that the trade war, certainly as Trump has designed it, is foolish.
I think let me pick up on that point of inevitability. I went through your book, The Tragedy of Great Power Politics. It's a good book. I really liked your analysis of the historical cases of French Napoleonic Wars, Germany, Imperial Japan, the Soviet Union. We can discuss. I would like to ask you a few questions there later. But based on that history, which is largely, as I see, is a history where empires used to be very central to geopolitics. You have theorized that the future would also mean that China's rise would be, China would have, let's say, an aggressive realism or an expansive trust going forward. But my question is that there is a big assumption there, isn't it? Because we are living in the age of nation states where nationalism has risen massively, even in Asia. In fact, the alliance that you just mentioned about to begin with, a lot of countries are not friendly with China. And how does one imagine China being able to rise by doing what the United States did to Haiti, to Cuba, to Nicaragua, Honduras, or what the British Empire did to India or Germany did in the interwar periods? How strong is that argument?
I want to be clear that, first of all, I want to be clear that, first of all, my argument has nothing to do with colonial empires. Colonial empires are not important in my story. What matters are states, great powers in particular. This is a book that's entitled The Tragedy of Great Power Politics. So it's all about the relations between great powers. The second point is I agree with you completely about the importance of nationalism. I've long argued that it's the most powerful political ideology on the planet. And furthermore, when we talk about states today, we're not talking simply about states, we're talking about nation states. And the concept of a nation state is basically all about nationalism, nation state, right? The national state. So these are nation states. I would also add to this, and this is one of the principal reasons I opposed the Iraq War, and that is that it is foolish in most cases to invade another country, because what will happen is you will run into a hornet's nest because of nationalism. That nation state that you invade will not want you threatening its sovereignty, and it will cause you all sorts of problems. So my view is you stay out of places like Afghanistan if you're smart. You stay out of places like Iraq. And when I was young, I learned this lesson during the Vietnam War. So I'm fully in agreement with you on the importance of nationalism. And again, it's embedded in the concept of a nation state. But what you want to understand about China is that it already controls a huge swath of territory on the Asian mainland. And we're not talking about China invading other countries on the Asian mainland. That's not the issue here. This is not like the Cold War where we worried about the Soviet Union attacking into Western Europe. China controls the Asian mainland. We're not threatening China on the Asian mainland. China, right, has interests in, number one, the South China Sea, number two, Taiwan, and number three, the East China Sea. These are the three major flashpoints. And that's where we have to concentrate on containing China. We have to make sure that the Chinese don't invade Taiwan. We have to make sure that they don't dominate the South China Sea or the East China Sea.
I guess that's precisely where I would have taken this conversation into, because one side of your argument is based on theory, what has happened in the past. Of course, as you rightly pointed out, you don't word imperialism as a category of analysis, but nevertheless, I think the age of empire is worth mentioning in that analysis, precisely because we are living in an age of nationalism. But that apart, I think the theory apart, I think it is helpful to go through what are the emerging signals? And you've mentioned three: Taiwan, East China Sea, and South China Sea. Your critique would say that Taiwan is a completely special case. I mean, you know the history of China. I am a history student. It's a special case because both China and it's hard to say now what the section of that in Taiwan, but there's definitely a lot of people in Taiwan still believes on the both sides of the Taiwanese Strait that they are part of one China. And so my question to you is that how correct is it that even if for a moment we assume that China would have an aggressive takeover of Taiwan, let's assume, I don't think it's right, but let's assume that's true. How much of that explains China's engagement with the rest of Asia?
Well, the point is that China has a vested interest in taking over Taiwan because it believes it's sacred Chinese territory and it belongs to China, right? But the important point here is that if China were to take Taiwan, it has all sorts of strategic implications for the balance of power in East Asia. If China were to dominate the South China Sea and the East China Sea the way it wants to, if it were to take Taiwan, if it were to push the Americans beyond the first island chain and then the second island chain and get them out of East Asia, this would have huge consequences on the balance of power in East Asia. And this would mean it would have consequences for the local states in the region. Countries like Vietnam, the Philippines, Japan, South Korea, so forth and so on, and for India as well. So this is a very important issue, Taiwan, for geostrategic reasons as well as for nationalistic reasons.
So on the question of geostrategic, I mean, first of all, we should, everyone knows it, but I'd still like to rehash that. A lot of that geostrategy is there because of the massive presence of the United States. And then the question becomes, what is wrong, or what is the consequence that you perceive if the United States were to withdraw from, let's say, the South China Sea? Because a lot of those conflicts are border conflicts. A huge part of the conflict is, of course, geostrategic, who will dominate the region. But a lot of conflicts on the islands, about these dash lines and stuff, these are essentially border conflicts because there used to be empires, and when empires broke down, you mentioned India, the conflict between India and China is precisely something as a lot of us see as border conflicts rather than something that of nationalism, which we are now building up on from the Indian side. So my question to you is that a lot of people like us would see the volatility of this geopolitics emerging precisely from the presence of the United States in the first place.
If the United States was not in East Asia, it would make no difference for the India-China conflict in terms of
absolutely. That's
how
my
intense
question.
It is, right? There's no question about that. And the same is true with regard to Taiwan. If you took the United States away, the Taiwanese, and I'm disagreeing with you a bit here, the majority of Taiwanese, the overwhelming majority of Taiwanese do not want to be part of China.
Okay.
They've developed the Taiwanese identity.
There has been a
time.
history, yes.
So if you had a referendum, the Taiwanese would vote to remain independent and become a de jure nation state.
Rather than a loose integration.
Rather than a loose integration.
Okay.
The Taiwanese want to be a sovereign state. And the Chinese don't accept that. They believe that Taiwan is part of China. It is sacred territory. So you have this fundamental disagreement there. And that's independent of the United States. And you certainly know that the Japanese and the Chinese have a rich history of fighting wars and of hating each other. All you have to do is go back really to 1931 when the Japanese took Manchuria, and then 1937 when full-scale war broke out between Japan and China that lasted until 1945 to recognize that the potential for conflict between Japan and China is ever present, whether the United States is located in the region or not. The point about the United States is that it's probably necessary to have the United States in East Asia for purposes of containing China. If the United States was not there, I don't think the Japanese and the other countries in East Asia could do it themselves.
Help me get through a few sequence of arguments here, because initially we said that based on your framework of realist analysis, that it is important to contain China from the United States perspective because the rise of China would be detrimental to, I assume, not just cutting back United States power, but also to a lot of others. Is that correct? Is that assumption? Okay, if that is correct, and then on the follow-up answer, you said that if it was not for the United States, granted the problem of Taiwan is a special case, as I admit. There are cases of that in all post-colonial nation states where nationalisms went in different directions. Let's not discuss about Taiwan for a moment. But in terms of other nations, let's say about peaceful coexistence of Japan and China, what makes us believe that that's not possible without the United States?
The East China Sea.
But that's United States.
No, that's on the contrary, it's the Japanese and the Chinese. There are a handful of rocks, small islands in the East China Sea that are bitterly, I'm choosing my words carefully here, they're bitterly disputed by Japan and by China.
But do you really believe that those border conflicts, which I would define as border conflicts, would really threaten peaceful, would these border conflicts necessarily take the two nations into war in today's day and age?
Yes, there is a serious possibility that if the United States wasn't there, and even with the United States there, that Japan and China could get into a fight over what the Japanese call the Senkaku Islands and the Chinese call the Diao Islands. No, you do not want to underestimate the potential for trouble.
And you believe those conflicts would have been there even without